Hi, my Ripley friends. So we are going to be reading Exodus 21 today. We just finished Exodus 20, which was when the Lord gave the 10 Commandments, and he explained what his basic law was to the people. And so he's going to start elaborating on some of these things now. So we're going to go ahead and read through 21 and just see what he has to say about some certain things. And you can listen to me in the background if you want, or you can read along with me. I don't particularly care what version you read. I'm reading from the New King James Version, but you can read whatever is easiest for you to understand. So we're going to go ahead and start right now. Chapter 21, verse 1. And this is about the law concerning servants. Now, before I even start with this, this may be controversial. This version says servants. Other versions say slaves. I'm not going to say that, but well, okay, I am going to say it. I think that they changed the word to servant because it has less of a sting at least in the United States, as the word slave. But we're going to find out what the Lord says about enslavement or servitude. And we're going to talk about that a little bit here, okay? So, chapter 21, verse 1. Now these are the judgments which ye shall set before them. If you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. See, it had to do, my understanding is it had to do with indebtedness, or you could buy somebody is what they're saying. So like, and it'll talk about this a little bit more. Like, let's just say I had some sort of a debt, or my husband had a debt. He might sell one of our children, like an older child, who could do work for, to somebody who could pay that debt. And then after 6 years, that child would go free. Okay, so verse 3. If he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her child shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. So there is a way to... There is a way... Okay, so if he gets married, this is according to the Old Testament, the old law, not the new law. Also, I do want to interject here that the Bible doesn't necessarily condone slavery, because when we go and we looked at Philemon, remember Paul wanted Philemon to let Onesimus go free. Okay, so but anyway, at this time of this writing, which we look at that too when we're studying, right? If during that 6-year time, if a servant took a wife and she had children, the wife stayed. So it might not be a good, I don't know, you figure it out. Maybe you could buy your, I don't know. I don't think I would want to be indebted that way, but okay. But if the servant plainly says, now listen to this. If the servant plainly says, I love my master, my wife, my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Now, here's the thing about that. Like, I was just going to say, I don't think I would want to marry, but because I wouldn't want to leave my family, right? This man here in this example, he did marry, and he had children, and he couldn't abandon them. So he loved them so much, and he says he loves his master, but he loved his family. He wasn't going to leave them. So he went and he says, I'm not going to go. And so they took him to the judge, and they pierced his ear, and he became a bondslave. So he became indebted, not indebted, but he did become a servant to that master. So this is a very interesting, now that I think about this is very interesting. This is kind of what Jesus does, He lowered himself. Like, he could have gone out and been a free man, right? just a regular person in society, definitely at least one step above a servant. But because he loved his wife and his children so much, he took a step down and is serving this master. And that's kind of what Jesus did. You know, Jesus loves us so much that he took a step down and became a human being and came to earth. And he ended up getting pierced pretty bad, okay, in his hands and his feet and his side, and with the crown of thorn and all the other things. So there's actually a picture of Jesus right here. Okay, verse 7, if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to foreign people, since he has dealt deceitfully with her. And if he has betrothed her to his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, and her marriage rights. And if he does not do these three for her, then she shall go out free without paying money. So we are, I think that what this is talking about is kind of, I could be wrong on this, but it sounds to me like it's like a mail order bride type thing is what I'm getting from this. He's supposed to be treating her as a wife. And they did this because, remember, children were valuable, extremely valuable. They should still be valuable, really, but they were very valuable then because those children became part of the community and everybody worked together. Their communities were set up differently. You know, we're independent here. I have my house, you have your house. They didn't live like that. They lived in more close-knit communities, and children tended the field, tended the flocks, gathered, and they all worked together for the good of the community. There wasn't this division. Like, for example, I'm moving, and the house I'm moving into, it belongs to Candace and Lucas, my daughter and son-in-law. And it's our space, and there has to be some respect, because in our culture, you don't just walk into another person's house, although they can come and go as they please, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, they'll have their food, we'll have our food. They'll have their pets, we'll have our pets. There will be some community things going on because of differences in the land in the two areas where they have established gardens. At the house where I'm going to be living, the place where they've just moved to is flat. My place is hilly, so some other things, you know, you see what I'm saying? Like, we will incorporate in some areas, but in other areas it will be separate. But that's just us. For the most part, culturally, we're separate. That's two separate families, even though we're all family. Whereas back in this time, everybody in the community, whether you were considered a servant or a part of the birth order of the family, and that included the children, they all worked together for the good of the family. And there have been signs of stories in the past of women who were being punished, you know, because they didn't find pleasure in them, so they would cut the food back, or you know, there'd be bickering and things like that. And this is saying you're not supposed to do that. So this little part that we read here is the regulations of servitude. So one of the things historically, according to the Levitical law or God's law, slaves are only supposed to be enslaved for 7 years. They're not supposed to be, after the 7th year, they're supposed to be released. And they can become bond slaves. And then there are a law to protect, the laws protected servants from harsher slavery in other communities around them. And it was one of the things that we talked about in Philemon with Onesimus, is that, you know, Paul was presenting with him all the laws concerning God's laws and God's expectation for how his people are supposed to behave, but also realizing that Philemon was living under Roman law. And Roman law, in that particular case, Onesimus was taking a risk going back. He could have been put to death. And God's law doesn't allow for that with servants. Not on the whims of, you know, if they commit a crime, then the crime will fall under the law. that God provides, but they cannot be mistreated or put to death just because the master of the house is mad that day and feels like taking it out on somebody to a harsh measure, is what I'm saying. Okay, verse 21. This is concerning violence. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. However, if he did not lie in wait, but God delivered him to his hand, then I will appoint for you a place where he may flee. So he's talking about an accident, if it's an accident. But if a man acts with premeditation against his neighbor to kill him by treachery, you shall take him from my altar that he may die. So he's talking about, remember he said, thou shalt not commit murder. So if you do, this is what's going to happen. And he's kind of clarifying what's murder. So if it's an accident, like, I'm not watching where I'm going and I bump into somebody and they fall over a cliff. I didn't push them. I just bumped into them and they fell and they died. That was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. But if I went up and I shoved them over a cliff, that's treachery, okay? And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. And we know that we're supposed to honor our mother and father. And he just puts it flat out. You know, you're supposed to obey your parents. And see, here's the thing. And I used to say this to my kids, and it's probably true. But I remember like watching the movie's The Sound of Music, and they had all those kids in the church hiding from the Nazis, and they were telling them to be quiet. And I would tell, for my one daughter in particular, I was like, if we were in that situation, we would have died, because you would have been saying, Mommy, oh, his light flashed on me and all this stuff. You would have been hysterical and you wouldn't have kept your mouth shut like I would tell you to do. But it says, he who strikes his mother or father shall surely be put to death. And he's talking about being obedient to your parents, because the parents' job is to keep their children alive so that they can grow up and become adults, okay? And that means you have to listen to your parents. But I shall be put to death. And in that case, like in the example I was giving, we all would have died because she was a rebellious child. So sometimes that might be the problem. Your rebellious child could actually bring calamity into the community where you're living. Okay, verse 16. He who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hands, shall surely be put to death. So no kidnapping. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Okay, he repeated it again. He's not joking about that. If a man contend with each other, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be acquitted, and he shall only pay for the loss of his time, and shall provide for him to be thoroughly healed. So he's saying, like you get in a fist fight and you hurt somebody pretty bad and they have to go to bed to heal, you're not necessarily going to be put to death because the guy didn't die, but you're going to compensate him for the cost of treatment and for the wages that he lost, right? Okay, verse 20. And if a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. So you're not supposed to treat your servants that way. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. I don't like that verse, but you know what? It's not my will, it's God's. I don't like the way that it was used, okay? Because I happen to know that there were people in the United States prior to the Civil War who believed that they could beat their slaves within an inch of their life, and they were entitled to do so. And I don't really think that that's what this particular verse is saying. I think they're saying something different here. I just don't believe that's what God intended. But anyway, verse 22. If men fight and hurt a woman with child so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determined. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. That's why I don't believe that that is what God intended when he was talking about up here in verse 21, because verse 26 says, if a man strike the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. So you can't maim these people, okay? That's not what God intended, okay? And if he knocks out the tooth of his male servant or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth. Okay, 28. Now we're going to talk about liability here. Animal control. If an ox gores a man or a woman to death, and then the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be acquitted. Okay? So basically saying, your ox went and gored somebody and killed them, we're going to kill the ox, but the owner is not going to be held responsible for that death. In other words, you're not going to die, but your ox is going to die. So they do lose in that respect. But if the ox tended to thrust with its horn in past times, and it has been made known to its owner that he has not kept it confined, so that it has killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. So this one is saying, you got a feisty little ox that goes out there and kind of swings its horns around, right? And you knew it, and you didn't do something about it, and it goes and it kills somebody. Now you're going to go be put to death. So he's saying you need to be responsible for your animals, okay? And if you're not, we're going to deal with you. So if there is an I'm on verse 30. If there is imposed on him a sum of money, then he shall pay to redeem his life whatever it is imposed on him, whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter. According to this judgment it shall be done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he shall give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. And if a man, which by the way, 30 shekels of silver, can you think of where we heard of that? That was in the Gospels. That's what Judas got for betraying Christ. It was the cost of a slave, is what Christ was betrayed for. And if a man opens a pit, and if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make it good, and he shall give money to their owner, but the dead animal shall be his. So that's just with an animal. I don't know what would happen. It doesn't really say here if a person fell in there. If one man's ox hurts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money from it. And the dead ox they shall also divide. For it is known that the ox tended to thrust in time past, and its owner has not kept it confined. He shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall be his own. So the Lord is saying, be responsible for your pets or your livestock and your animals. Be responsible for the property that you manage. You want to keep it safe, because I don't know how one person's ox would go through another. Maybe it's a travel area where people take their flocks and their herds. I'm not really sure about that particular part. If anybody knows, it would be helpful to explain that to us culturally, what was going on there. But I just want to cover just a little recap of what I have written here. So he goes over personal injury and crimes, capital punishment, murder and kidnapping. Murder and kidnapping and cursing parents. That's capital punishment. You're to be put to death for those things according to the old law. Assault, an eye for an eye, and let the crime fit the punishment. That's what we say today. Let the crime fit the punishment. And then liability, responsibility versus negligence. So he clarified that he wants us to be responsible. He wants us to be conscious of what we're doing. When I was reading this, I was thinking about something else that I had listened to or read. I'm not really sure how it got into my head. Was talking about worshiping the Lord in everything that you do, right? And it was Faith again. It was something she had been saying. And interestingly, she had talked about serving and how even cleaning a toilet could be a form of worship. I clean toilets all the time. And, you know, when we're working, okay, and especially in a service industry, which I think whether you want to call it that or not, I mean, because things like other monetary things, you know, there's accountability that goes with that. So you want to be responsible to whoever your employer is and your customers, okay? And you do it in a way that they're going to be pleased. So whatever that case may be, if you're waitressing or you're cutting people's hair, or you're a doctor, or you're a police officer, or whatever your job is, you want to make sure that people are safe, you know, that you're doing your job properly. Because if you're doing your job properly first to the Lord, then you're going to want to make sure that your customers are safe, that they're getting the true value, at least the value at minimum of whatever they're paying for. That if you're like your property is okay, here's an example. Eventually I'll probably have chickens. Now I already know this because we found out from experience, but there are neighbors that are not going to want to have my chickens going into their yard, scratching up their flower beds. You know, chickens do that and they'll tear things up. So it's my responsibility to, first of all, respect my neighbor's property, but also to be obedient and servant to the Lord, that I don't just let my chickens run wild. And, you know, people do that, not so much anymore, because of things that have happened with dogs. But there was a woman in the neighborhood when I was growing up. Her dog would go in everybody else's yard, and you know what dogs leave behind, you know. So they're talking about responsibility versus negligence here is what I'm trying to get at. And that if you're responsible in the tasks that you do, you are worshiping the Lord. Okay. And then also the protection of rights. And you know, the Lord mentions in here servants, and he mentions women who are vulnerable individuals. They're underneath. They're not leaders per se in this community, and they are to be treated a certain way with respect to their position within that community, understanding that they don't have authority like the leader of that community would have. So they're going to be protected, especially women. You know, like when he was talking about how you don't put them out if you're not happy with them, or you don't cut back their provision if you don't like them. You're still supposed to get just as much food and rights as anybody else in the community. So that's where we are now with verse 21. I'm done for today. I will try to get 22 out as soon as I possibly can. But I appreciate everybody who's listening. And I appreciate all your feedback. And I will see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.